Baolerhu Ligden is the founder and executive director of the Asia Leadership Development Network. It's a not-for-profit organization that helps emerging leaders in Mongolia and beyond. And we're going to talk more about that. But we also have an incredible story of God at work to tell you as well. Baolerhu, thanks for being with us on Missions today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Tell us a bit about ALDN, if you will, as we start.
Sure. ALDN is a relatively young organization. I'm a founder and executive director of ALDN, Asia Leadership Development Network. It was started about 7 years ago in my transition moving back from Shanghai to California. As I settle, as a Christian, I care about my calling significantly. That season, kind of burned out from corporate and thinking about how do I use my gift and talents, and what is my kingdom contribution that matters to God, and that led me to basically starting ALDN. The mission of ALDN is really impacting tied to my even story, my community story, gospel community story in Mongolian community. So God led me back to where I'm from and how to equip the church and advance the gospel. So ended up starting ALDN with the mission of impacting the emerging leaders of different sphere of influence to transform the nation of Mongolia and beyond for gospel and for Jesus.
That's wonderful. We're going to come back to more about what ALDN is doing today and exactly the kinds of things you do with those leaders in Mongolia and beyond. But I want to start with your story. I've just read little bits and pieces of it, but it's a pretty astounding story. Would you tell us a bit about your faith journey and how you got into ministry activity?
Absolutely. How I grew up, it's quite unusual and different from where it is here in America. I actually grew up in a half nomadic family. My family raised me on a ranch. They raised cattle and sheep, and my family used to move around twice a year. And you probably on a documentary or National Geography, you've seen this little picture of a yurt. So I was born in a yurt and grew up until about 7 years old in a yurt. And the only way in a little ranching and nomadic community, kids can get out to do something that, it's a different cycle than their parents are education. Basically, my parents sent me away to boarding school, and that's the only way to get out of the town and to learn things and basically access to new stuff. But in early 90s, 1993, I went to capital of Inner Mongolia, which is northern part of China, bordered with Mongolia. It's a minority region, the capital city, Hohhot, for high school. I was 13 years old. And that it's a very historic moment, I guess, in that in that part of history. There's a transition happening because suddenly China opened to the world, Mongolia, communism collapsed, Western things started flooding in. We're really talking about democracy, capitalism, gospel of Jesus, all coming in at the same time. In a mission circle, probably people heard about the term called unreached and unchurched people group. So 1990, the Mongolian people, literally 10 million Mongolian-speaking people, is considered unreached and unchurched people group. So 1993, 13 years old, going to this public school, and my school was the first school piloted English education program. And I was lucky enough to be part of that pilot program, be the lab kid, to experiment basically learning education in trilingual education. Now that I know that changed trajectory of my life, the most significant thing that happened is not only I get to learn English, through learning English, I met my missionary teacher, who was Southern Baptist missionary who came to our region trying to outreach to Mongolians, for gospel, and got to know about Jesus and heard about gospel outside of classroom from him weeks after weeks, and just being curious kid and asking about Jesus, and finally accepted Jesus. And then the funny part is, after I accepted Jesus, I asked him, what would I do now? And then my teacher was like, well, if it is in America, we'll go to church. And I was like, what does church look like? It's like, oh, church is a place people raise you, disciple you, learn God's word. I said, what about here? He said, Well, young man, unfortunately, you're one of the couple hundred young people probably accepted Jesus, and there's no identified Mongolian church in your entire 5 million speaking Mongolian people right now in your community. Bible is only translated 2 gospel books in your language as a beta version, and that's all we got. So if you want to grow in your faith, I would love to spend time with you to disciple you. But other than that, really not much resources. So that was basically my humble beginning of a faith journey and a walk with Lord as a young teenager.
I want to pause right there just for a moment, just so people can get a little more understanding of how you were raised, being born on this ranch and this nomadic family, born in a yurt, raised in a yurt until you went off to this boarding school. Was there any type of religion, any type of deity? What kind of things did you experience as a child related to faith?
Yeah, so it's a very confusing place, I would say. Overall, the culture I grew up on, nominal Buddhist. Majority of the people, like in a countryside, if they're born, they typically consider themselves some sort of nominal Tibetan Buddhist. So Tibetan Buddhism is a one branch of Buddhism. It's heavily came out of Tibet. And then outside of Tibetan people, Mongolian people are probably the second largest group that follow Tibetan Buddhism. So the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism is Dalai Lama, he's very famous. And then, of course, shamanism is one of the oldest religion exists in a nomadic or animistic worship kind of culture. So we share that with a lot of tribal cultures around the world. There are that. And then, of course, communism came and wiped out a lot of that. So it's also a lot of atheists in a more educated circle. So I guess that's my background in a community where I grew up with.
Once you came to Christ through the discipleship of this missionary, did you have a chance to communicate this back to your parents? What was their response?
Yeah, so you think about upside down kind of God's kingdom. You know, I've never been to a place Jesus wanted to change a nation, a group. Then his plan was basically, I'm going to change a nation through a group of teenagers. And that was exactly what happened in our community in Mongolia or Inner Mongolia. Basically, the first ever group of people responded to gospel because our parents' generation was brainwashed. There's a lot of mistrust from the West because, Jesus was portrayed as Western thing, which we know that is not, but because of the Cold War, communism, and all of this, the older generation, 40, anything above, 30 something above, they were just didn't have any interest from anything from the West and mistrust. Who were the one open, their mind was very open, they were curious, whole bunch of teenagers. We want to listen to Michael Jackson, we want to drink Coca-Cola. So I ended up everything, we didn't have the filter. So, typically, like in America, you hear about, I was raised in a Christian home. Your parents kind of shape your value. Ours was opposite. Our parents didn't shape our Christian walk. We were the one actually became first. And then we go try to influence the older generation, which is hard. But that exactly was the story. And the gospel was basically kind of very heavy in teenagers and college student movement. And then during the summer break and winter break, students will take gospel back to their hometown and share with their childhood friends, to their relatives and their mom and dads. Of course, it's a hierarchy culture. There's a lot of seniority. There's honor and shame. So think about kids coming to parents and tell them the way of living and what is truth. And that could be pretty offensive, I would say majority parents actually don't take it well, particularly in the early days. So there's a half and half. There are certain parents, basically literally reject their kids and, disown them or persecution, a certain type of thing happen in the community. And then there are parents, I was the part that the other 50% was actually my parents really kind of, they didn't understand what I believe, but they actually give me a lot of grace, basically saying, well, my son, the day we send you off to education, we know your worldview, what you're going to choose, your spouse, everything you're going to be different. and we have to trust that. We have to allow you to give you room that
Mm.
you're going to choose a life that's different than mine. So that gives me a lot of peace and also really helped with our relationship.
Yeah. Wow. Talk for a moment about this high school time period and then on to college. I know that you said there were no churches at that time. You all were the first Christians, if you will. So, how did the church form? How did you begin to experience worship or time of learning together? What did that look like?
High school is very limited because it's my school happened to be one of the really best school and ended up it's half military base, so almost like Monday to Saturday you can't even leave the campus. So very limited social interaction as young kids. We're kids. So faith was just basically growing, but a lot of nurturing from missionary friends and other people that we met, but very inward. It was taking quite a bit of time inward growth. But really getting to college, that's where I think the vision, the excitement, and peers, and all of this started like growing. Because I got the freshman in college. It's a big public university. It's a college town. Literally have like 15 universities nearby. And then I get to meet some other Christians who are young like me. So we got so excited. We get to spend time together. And then literally, as we read the Bible, early days of church, that image and that story, the vision was capturing our heart. And Jesus said, two and more than two of you get together, I'm with you. And that we literally, we didn't just say about it. We literally believed that was the definition of church. So how about let's get together? So my high school buddy, a couple of them became Christians too. We started like gathering together, doing Bible studies, growing our faith, talking about faith every day, not just Sunday, that 2 hour, every single day. We weekly we'll meet like 4 or 5 times and talking about our faith. There was just something exciting, passionate, warm, hot things going on. And then we just nowadays I think back, that was exactly Holy Spirit was doing. And then we can't stop. This is the best thing ever happened to our life. So we're like decided to let's share with our friends. So we started sharing among college students as people started joining. So that was basically the foundation of early days, basically house church movement. So hundreds of college students, come to small groups, and of course, it's part of China, so we can't do it publicly. Well, but let me take that back. It was an interesting time, late 90s and 2000. It's not today's China. Even though it's minority region, there was little softness, and then also it kind of surprised the government too, because government wasn't thinking that, well, you not Mongolians, Christianity, this 100 years never existed, so they weren't expecting suddenly there's like 100,000 of college students becoming Christian, and so they weren't even prepared to do anything with us until it started causing problem for them because it started growing so wildly. And college students are basically meeting up, evangelizing, sharing good news, and just people walking with each other. I think today I look back, that was, literally 20 plus years ago in my life, in my late teen years and then early 2000s. I look back, probably not 8 or 9 out of 10 things we've done is not theologically sound
Yeah.
or is not is not good because we didn't have experience.
Right.
Despite that, God still found his people. God still grow his church, and God still kind of established the historic milestone of his own modern day church among Mongolian young people, and it strived, and there was a lot of brokenness, sin, and leadership fall, and every level. But I think that was the beauty of it. I think it's not the perfection, it's not the experience. It's like authentically walking with God despite who we are, despite the situation, because we heavily have to count on gospel and his salvation and his grace to build the church and to be part of the church, and to not just do the ministry, is actually be the ministry and be the church.
It was truly organic foundation and growth, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, missionaries and outside people helped a lot. But I think really, God laid his foundation of his own Mongolian church
Yeah.
basically through a group of young people and said, uh, I want you guys to be the spiritual father of this community. And these kids is like, oh, but we're orphans, we didn't have
Yeah.
father.
Yeah.
So this thing, some of this brokenness is actually catches us or catches a generation of leaders later on. But at that point, we didn't understood it. We were very genuine to whatever we know, and God used it, and this church has grown, and just a lot of exciting. I still have a lot of sweet memories of uh, uh, making Jesus film. I was actually Jesus film Mongolian language project manager. So back then there was only 3 house church, actually our Mongolian church. So we gathered together people as a voice actor, like put up our secret studio in an apartment, recording Jesus film, and that was a hit because people using media, so verbally little sharing gospel and this, that was important. But storytelling of Jesus, people visualizing Jesus, that was, there was a kind of growth, really hit that expansional growth when Jesus
Mm.
film was released. Because now the people not only can hear about Jesus, people can visualize his life, and through the film and media understanding Jesus' story, and that was very powerful. College students used to all carry, back then before DVD is called VCD. So people used to carry VCD in their backpacks and take them to countryside and just show it to their relatives and friends. And all the communist propaganda theaters was not working anymore because there's no
Mm.
nothing. So ended up people put Jesus film in the propaganda movie theater. And so ended up there's village people are all watching Jesus film and accepted Jesus. It's just a pretty
That's
wild
great.
story.
That's great. Did you ever face any persecution? Did you ever face any efforts to close down what you were trying to do in those early days?
We had a kind of sweet a few year was a kind of that gray area, so they wasn't aware, and then suddenly they start aware, well, this is not good, there's this many people gathering. Not, of course, it's not like a mega church gathering, it was like a small cell house church gathering and so on. So people started, the religious bureau, public security start paying it, and then our neighbors, all those things started reporting people from because people gather in dormitory are fine, but typically a lot of times it's apartment and so on. So we start losing our meeting places, and our landlord will kick us out for no reason, and or we want to start using a place for a little party or outreach stuff, and then the hotel will cancel our spot, and so early days was a lot of that kind of persecution because we're young college students. We didn't have much social other connections, so it doesn't cause a lot of, I guess, societal harm to them. So they wouldn't. But then after people start graduating, start engaging in workplace, and that's where they started have a new wave of persecution coming in, predominantly from a, we call it social pressure, and then also they start pressuring our family members and start pressuring our workplace and said, hey, I don't want you to, if you are in a place like Inner Mongolia, there's a lot of young people work for a state-owned enterprise or government jobs, and so that's where you basically kind of draw the very clear line. If you become Christian, you can't take these jobs, or they will dismiss you. So we have a lot of people literally altered their career choice because of that. Businesses started having persecutions and yeah, those kind of things. But um, for a long time we thought that was just a norm because Bible described it all the time. It was never about, our life was never about comfort and all these things. So for me, it was a little culture shock when I came to America as an international student, um, because my early days of Christian walk and church and coming here is very very culturally contradictive. Yeah.
Yeah, talk about that transition to the US and how you moved into business. Talk about that transition.
Sure. One thing, as a very curious kid, I asked all the really kind of odd questions, I guess, for the missionaries back then. Most of kids will get together, the missionaries will spend time with us, or Korean missionaries, or Americans. My friends will ask them about all this church stuff. I will ask those too. But then additionally, I'll ask them, what does God care about economy? Most missionaries like, what, you know, why don't you just spend time with church? And this is ministry. I said, well, didn't Bible say God created everything? If everything, that literally means everything. That means the earth, that means the economy, the environment, all this. So back then, I guess, because of that kind of encounter, I realized there's so many things I didn't know, and theologically, knowledge wise, and just experience of understanding God's kingdom. I'm definitely a more kingdom minded person rather than church minded person. So that early days of my questions led me to basically want to study business. I studied information system management in my undergrad in Inner Mongolia, but I really realized I'm an entrepreneur. Even church planting journey showed me that I'm entrepreneur, doing ministry, solving problems. A lot of it is entrepreneurs. How do I practice that, particularly in a business sense? And I also noticed that there's a lot of social transformation, deeper gospel application in a societal sense that wasn't able to get done through church. So I guess I when I was 23, I got hold of my first book about business and mission, and that just completely my eye lit up, and I was like, this is describing what I care about. So a couple years later, I got open door to come to America to study business, and I wanted to study business, and came to school in Tennessee, and that's how my journey in America started, and spent some time there for school, involved in a few things, international student ministry and so on. But post graduating, I pursued basically a business career and joined a medical technology company, worked for them in southeast part of US, and then later on transited, led their business development effort in Asia and moved to Shanghai, China, and helped them launch business, office, and basically kind of selling medical solution and services to the major cancer hospitals in Asia, predominantly in China, and spent some time in marketplace ministry. So it's a kind of interesting journey because that season of my life, God really helped me to understand my faith integrating into business. What does that look like, and how do I live gospel in the city? How do I live a gospel in a marketplace? How do I relate to employees, colleagues, and vendors and partners in business? And what does God is doing in a marketplace, in a vibrant economy like China and Southeast Asia? So it has been a very good journey and adventure.
What led you to begin Asia Leadership Development Network? And then we'll talk more specifics about what you're trying to do to communicate and share this message that you've just talked about.
Despite I was in Shanghai and different things, I did still support my friends, and a lot of my friends became pastors and ministry leaders back home, and go back to Inner Mongolia. My wife is from Mongolia, so we travel back to the region, just financially and holidays and certain ways we engage people. If we find out Mongolian leaders need some trainings, we take them out to Tim Keller's training in Hong Kong or Asian Access. We collaborate with people. But then really the tipping point, I guess the changing that time happened is towards the end of my career time in Shanghai. I realized corporate work was good, but I was a little burned out. I also realized the way that corporate work set up was like, this is a letter. Uh, this is their mission and vision. Take care of that well for them. They will take care of you. But leave your passion, leave your certain things outside. You do that in your hobby, doing your private life. And then for me, another downside is my second kid was born. My wife was in Shanghai, don't have much friends, and I was traveling all the time, flying like 100 times a year. There are days I just feel like this is not the life I want. This doesn't align with the value. This is now the marriage, and we were suffering in some way, and I was kind of just feeling like I was not being a good dad and husband, and also in terms of my own heartfelt, my depths of my calling, I was not fulfilled. I was not doing the things God made me to do. Rather, I'm just, you know, for others, for a lot of my friends and nearby, they're like, you're living the life, you have a good job and, company pay for your apartment, your kids go to international school, all kind of good stuff. People, excited about for you, but then you have to be honest with God in the end. It's when I face God and spend time with him, I know that this is not the life he wants for me. And I don't have peace. I don't feel good about it. So during that time, I started kind of soul searching a little bit. I did backpacking back to my hometown in Mongolia. I traveled, met with pastors, met with politicians. And by this time, I'm, in my late 30s and early 40s. So I'm a little more socially experienced in business. And so God opened quite a bit of doors. So when I met with people, I was basically doing my own due diligence, asking the question, gospel came to our region 25 years ago to 30 years ago. What has happened? What has not yet? What are some of the big hurdles that as a big C church we're facing? And what are things that is, I'm always looking for the problems to solve as an entrepreneur. So that few trips really made me to wonder quite a bit of things. For instance, a few big observation that I had was in Mongolia, in our community, we see people who are very faithful, strong in their faith, but they rarely understand marketplace. And then we have people who are successful in marketplace who doesn't understand about faith. But you don't find people who are in between really understand both. You don't see that. So the faith and work integration, you don't rarely see that. There's a lot of prosperity gospel that I was talking about. Oh, if you do give to the church, you're gonna be rich. But that was not healthy either. And then second, leadership. By this time, my buddies, a lot of them in their early 40s, like me, they're leading church. They're doing good job, but there's something about their own leadership crisis, sustainability, burnout, loneliness, all kind of things start catching them because what you didn't have is what you didn't have. So the leadership crisis in the church community, and then mission agencies, organizations some are fading out and start transiting to the local leaders, but the local leaders aren't able to really get it to next level, instead, declining. And then just, how about if you observe, 7 out of 10 people accepting Jesus are still teenagers and young people. And then if you look at the resources going towards them are very limited. And just poverty, the gospel came, but the poverty rate actually grown rather than decline. So these things just doesn't make sense. And a lot of Christians, want to be missionary, but they don't have money, nothing. And how do you become missionary? How do you do things? And, very heavily dependent on outside money. If Korean church or American church stops supporting, and literally, I'm not kidding, 80 to 90% of ministry will stop. So this kind of thing is for a health of an ecosystem of a faith community is not healthy. For short term, it might be good, but if you imagine 50, 30 years later, it's still like this is not good. So those are things that I kind of observed, I guess, the big problems, and then came back and I was just processing that with my mentors in Shanghai. So what does this, how does this, should we find people, support them and address these issues? And I remember one of my mentor said this to me. He said, well, Baolerhu, it seems like all these things you're talking about, you care about it more than anything anybody else we ever met. Have you ever thought about, you talk about faith and work and business and mission, this kind of thing. You telling people there's nobody, and then about it. Have you ever thought all these years God took you out of your little bubble of community, despite he used you, he kind of trained you, shown you things and circling you all this way. And is that why he prepared you? And then it's just like, yeah, that's true. And then the most important part is like, instead of asking who should be the one doing, and God is, if this is what you want me to do, use me. So I prayed the dangerous prayer, God, if whatever breaks your heart, break my heart, and whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And that basically kind of convinced me this season of my life, I want to see the gospel advance and see the faith community grow in Mongolia, and just help the church to get to the next level, in a bigger level, to solve some problems. So that basically led me to basically start Asia Leadership Development Network.
Take just a couple of moments here. Tell us kind of some of the highlights of what Asia Leadership Development Network does on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis to help this process.
If you really look at our programs and our strategy is in this four kind of boxes, fold of strategy, I will call it. The first strategy is faith and work and entrepreneurship. So we run faith and work movements among Mongolian believers, just equip regular people, young professionals, college students, white collars, regular people work. What, not only just your Sunday matters to you, what about Monday to Saturday? A lot of times the faith community, I think around the world, we are in crisis, the crisis of disintegration. Our faith only belongs to a certain part of our life. That is not good. That's why we couldn't experience this flourishing and integration. So we teach that through faith and work movement, through we create content, run conferences, equip the seminars and seminaries, and work with faith community to talk about that. And then entrepreneurship piece is actually also very exciting. We actually realized, okay, what's the best way to equip church? And church sometimes don't appreciate entrepreneurs. I was an entrepreneur myself, so I know that. It's a little threat to the church. But I realized these are the people that God willing to take risk and do things. If you allow them to practice their gift and talents, what a great opportunity. But then the faith community, a lot of them want to start something, but the pastors discourage them or don't want them, and they don't know where to go to. So we started through our academy, basically helping entrepreneurs to launch their business. Basically goes through ideation stage, early stage Aspire Launchpad program, use a lot of modern day kind of framework, lean canvas, basically in a way discipling entrepreneurs on their business, but also on their ideas, but also in their spiritual formation, about their theological framework, about what their business can do to for the kingdom. So ended up with the whole ecosystem has grown quite a bit. Right now, about 500 to 600 entrepreneurs involved in our ecosystem. About 160 entrepreneurs went through our early stage, and about 40 something new business started in the last 4 years with all faith-driven kind of purposes. And then there's growth stage. A dozen of entrepreneurs go through growth stage stuff. So it's quite an exciting scene in a place that socioeconomically, people don't pay attention to in Central Asia, that part of the world. And suddenly there's a great movement of entrepreneurs who are launching their business, not only just bringing bread and on their own table, but trying to, create jobs, fight justice and mercy, and extend, a workplace culture a little differently, and then also advancing gospel, and also have room to practice generosity. So all these things are all built into this community. We have an annual gathering of conference called Unleash Summit. Our summit every year have about 400 entrepreneurs get together and talk about this kind of thing. So it's pretty exciting. Things are going on in this room space. The second part is leadership development. So entrepreneurs need leadership, but also church leaders, NGO leaders. I realize, Jesus was a perfect model of leadership in terms of servant leadership and so on. But servant leadership is not a thing that our culture even appreciate and didn't understood. So I realized a lot of leaders weren't servant leader. Their motivation, how they're leading was very, very different because nobody modeled them for them. Remember the younger generation, as a church, you're 40 something years old, you're father of the church. And a 40 something in America is considered a young person. So there's certain about value and things in our community. I believe knowledge and so many other things we can learn it really quick, but value is not. Value is something that's actually much slower, much concrete. A lot of them actually formation is around the people you spend time with in your home and so many places. And it ended up a lot of leaders didn't have those kind of good environment. So we start teaching servant leadership to the community through coaching, through programs, and then government opened some door. We started realizing some government leaders really want this, so we started running programs through servant leadership, situational leadership stuff, the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Finance, Parliament. So start working with some Christian politicians, and so got really kind of opened quite a bit of door in that space too. Amount of people we get to touch through our leadership programs. And then the third one is mercy and justice. In a community still like 20, close to 30% of poverty rate, you can't do stuff without touching mercy and justice. It has to. And then for us, because mercy work it's hard. It's a lot of labor intensive. As a small organization, we didn't have the capacity. We have some ideas, things, but pandemic really accelerated that. Because during pandemic, the poverty rate was, people living under $2, a dollar. I mean, they were the ones suffering. So during pandemic, we had all the trips were canceled. We have some money in our bank account, and we realized, our team members, we all prayed and realized, hey, there's something we can do about this issue. So we just try to be a good steward with what we have, and started with $25,000 we had in our account, and started creating monthly food pack and working with local church. And then fast forward, 3 years later, we have delivered 1.3 million meals in our community, working with 14 Mercy churches. Over 500 people accepted Jesus. And we just secured our land and trying to build a multifunctional community center that ties the dot of spiritual, social, vocational transformation kind of lab kind of space, tie all the community to do things. And then the last piece is being an entrepreneur. I saw in our community how much spiritual growth, of course, Bible is the most important part of in our spiritual formation and growth, but how many times we read about marriage books and leadership books that changes how we view our faith. We realize a lot of translators and missionaries were translating stuff, but they weren't good business people. So they don't know how to distribute them. And they don't know, and Mongolia is a big land. Remember, there's nomadic people. How do you get things in the nomadic people's hands? How do you get a big land with small population with a, I guess, less modern day logistic supply chain? How do you do those? So it's been always a challenge. The resource of equality, and the rural church couldn't access to things, and people are younger people have more technologies, but the olders don't. So internet and smartphone really became an option. So we basically try to solve that problem by launching a couple mobile applications, and ended up both of our mobile application became the largest, almost like a resource hub. So one of the application is to become the largest ebook, audiobook, podcast, a Bible plans kind of distribution hub. So 30 plus mission agencies put their content in our hub, and then we also launched some publishing based on that. So just all in all, in the last 6 years, we've been busy and we've been kind of productive. And of course, not everything we tried worked.
That's sure.
Being an entrepreneur, I'm very aware of there's things about testing, give enough runway. We probably totally, I would say we've done about 20 plus projects. I would say a good 7 projects that actually didn't make it after, we did either the hypothesis wasn't working, either resource ability to execute, there's certain things wasn't working, leadership. So we kind of closed them, sunset them, but the ones that working, we used the Matthew principle, said these aren't working, so let's allocate the resource and people, and then just double it down, because that's how the stewardship is about. The highest growth places you want to give more. So ended up these projects that I've mentioned just now, those were on the highest growth. So these ones, for instance, our app is like now 1 out of 3 Mongolian speaking Christians are using our app.
Wow.
Accessing. So our Mercy project I just explained, have 1.3 million meals in 3 years, and then that's astonishing growth and things. So all in all, it's been a very fun few years and hard few years, but I think that's the beauty about faith. Faith is never about static. It's about on the move when you do things and wrestle with God. Let the Holy Spirit lead you and work hard toward, but also counting on God to control the result and knowing that He, in the end, is His. How do we do those? So that has been our journey with Asia Leadership Network in the last few
Oh,
years.
what an incredibly powerful story of God at work from those early days out in the nomadic fields of Mongolia with your family to high school and college growth and experiencing God there, and then how He's taught you along the way. Thank you for sharing that journey, because I think we all experience that in some form or fashion. I don't know that we always grasp that He's usually preparing us for something down the line. I've experienced that in my own life. So I kind of smile as you talk about that, because that's the same thing that's happened with me. Jobs that I took or things that I did, I never thought would have any impact on my future ministry, ultimately did. And I was able to use those things. And you've done the same thing. It's an incredibly powerful story. As we wrap here, and thank you so much for your time today, as we wrap, how could people who are listening and have heard this incredible story be praying for you and your team that you feel like would be most effective?
Yeah, we constantly need prayers. Of course, we're in a place. Everybody. I don't think um, if you are seriously walk with God, there's going to be a lot of challenges. Well, I have to say seriously here, because there will be spiritual battles. There are problems and tensions and distractions and all this kind of things in the modern day world. And so, same, we are helping a very young Christian church to get to the next level. Average Christians in Mongolian community is only 23 years old. 80% of people who go to church are under 35 years old. So, which is almost flipping what American church is. So, we have an idea of that. But we still have only less than 2% Christians. So, a very young, vibrant church. And so, pray for the church, pray for the maturity of the church, pray for leaders who truly uh, serve others and for His kingdom as a priority. And as in a small organization, we're in our growing pain season. So as we scale, these things get deeper and wider. Touch a lot of people's life virtually, in depth, and significant doors God have opened up, even in government. This kind of thing. This doesn't happen. So from poorest of the poor to children, young adult, college, professionals, virtually, offline, and then to all the way to president's office. We had entered there and prayed for him and did things. So it's a pretty unique opportunity we are stewarding. So we can't do this alone. Pray for us, but also if there's any way that can engage with us, partner with us, and help mentor young leaders, help mentor entrepreneurs, and we work with a group of technologists in Mongolia as well, who are thinking about their faith and how that to do with tech. So the way that you can change this small nation for the future is tremendous. There's a tremendous opportunity. So we would love your prayers. We also love any ways your gift and talents can be a blessing to us as well.
Baolerhu Ligden, founder and executive director for the Asia Leadership Development Network. Thank you so much for being willing to share your story today, for your time, and for the incredible ministry that you have going on. It's exciting to hear about. We'll be sure to add you to our prayer list.
Well, thank you, Colin. It's my joy to be here.